let's talk about the open scrimmage or whatever you want to call it. I know it's a different format from years past, of course, and um, it's not your stereotypical spring game, and you've seen that a lot in recent years where coaches have kind of had their spring games more of a open practice than an actual spring game. And also a huge difference this year was that there was no that the spring game was not televised. And, a lot you've seen that around the country. I think coaches are afraid that their players are going to get poached or whatnot. Um, but also coaches may want to install some things that they don't want it to be broadcasted. But it was also different because there's a lot of fan interaction with the team after the spring game. Fans were able to take a picture with BK and also get autographs from their favorite players. And as you can imagine, the line for BK's autograph session was past the 50-yard line, and the line to get an autograph from Gary Nussmeier was even longer. And I actually like the fact that LSU kind of put all the, they kind of, for example, let's say the quarterbacks, this is how it was, the quarterbacks and offensive linemen were grouped together. So let's say everyone to get Gary Nussmeier's autograph. Well, they also had to go through the offensive line to get Gary Nussmeier's autograph, so that way everyone got equal love. But as you can imagine, the line to get Gary Nussmeier's autograph was really long. But kind of go for what happened in the spring game. Let's start off with the first part of the scrimmage, and that was the 11-on-11. And a lot of good things happened. I mean, from what I could tell, from Michael Van Buren was great, looked great out there. He was 6 for 7 for six. I think it was like 69 yards. He looked pretty good in the 11-11 portions. Of course, there was an 11-11 portion first, and then they had a lot of stuff in between that, and then they went to the second portion of 11-11. And Michael Van Buren looked pretty good out there. He did miss a wide open touchdown pass. Nick Anderson smoked DJ Pickett, but Michael Van Buren just missed him, and that was pretty much really his only quote unquote bad incompletion or bad overthrow. He looked pretty good pretty solid. Of course, Nussmeier looked pretty solid as well. But I think one of the key takeaways too was Harlem Berry. Harlem Berry looked good, man. And, Caden Durham went out early in the scrimmage. He got hurt in the earliest part of the 11-on-11. And he had to set out for most of it. But so Caleb Jackson took most of the reps on the first team offense, but Harlem Berry outshined him. I mean, Harlem Berry, so if you combine his carries on both the 11 v 11 sessions, he ran the ball 5 times for 53 yards and added 2 catches for 22 yards. I mean, that's a little over 10 yards a carry. He also had a 23-yard rush in the second half of the scrimmage. So he looked really good out there, and he had elite vision and he had a lot of great bursts. He was bouncing up tackles and showed off the same traits that made him a versatile. Well, really, just the number 1 running back in the country. Just to kind of sum that up, and he just looked really good out there. But the one thing that I haven't mentioned, and really this is the main takeaway from the scrimmage, was just how dominant the defensive line was, especially on the edge. I couldn't really count how many times LSU had a sack. LSU defense had a sack. There was no live stats, so you had to do your own stats. And sometimes, that's pretty difficult at times, right? I don't think people realize how difficult it is to do stats, right? Because you got to do offensive and defensive stats on your own. You got to be locked in like 150% of the time. It's extremely this is one of the more challenging things, and I've gotten better over time because, of course, I cover a lot of high school sports. So you have to you do your own stats, but when you're high in the press box, you don't have binoculars. You got to do your best to do the stats. But LSU had around 10 sacks in the scrimmage, and Jamari Butler had 3. He had the most. He was dominant all throughout the scrimmage. Jack Parburn also had 2 sacks. Gabe Relaford also had 2 sacks. Patrick Payne had a sack. And who else? And Ahmad Burrow had a sack. And Ahmad Burrow had two tackles for loss and 1 sack. Just a dominant performance by the edge rushers. And then, of course, Ahmad Burrow representing on the inside. And that's been a common theme among during spring camp, just the domination of the defensive line. And there's kind of two flips of the coin here, because on one hand, the defensive line looks dominant, especially on the edge. On the other side of the coin is the offensive line that bad? I mean, and it's a fair question. I mean, I'll say this. It's hard to judge what a team does during the spring and even in fall camp. And the reason why I say that is because during the 2019 National Championship team, I remember this, and I wasn't part of the media then, but I just remember this, as a student. And the offensive line was not very good, right? Like in that spring game. About 8 months later, that offensive line won the Jordan Moore Award, which is awarded to the best offensive line unit in the country. Another great example, Jane Daniels. When he first got to LSU, his spring game was awful. Awful. Remember, when he first got to LSU, they had to teach him footwork because he never really was developed properly when he was at Arizona State. And not only that, both Garrett Nussmeier, who was a freshman then, or redshirt freshman, because he already was a freshman, but you get the deal. And then Miles Brennan, remember him? They both had better spring games than Jane Daniels did. What is Jane Daniels doing now? He's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, going into his second year. A lot of things can happen. Also, I know this isn't really spring ball, but Deuce Chestnut, I remember, was probably LSU's best cover corner, if not the one of the best cover corner in LSU's fall camp in 2023. He left the team midseason because he got beat out. He did not look great. Got beat out and had some discipline issues and left the team. So it's hard to judge the offensive line's performance in the spring because, like I say, you won't know anything until LSU travels to Clemson, South Carolina, goes into the other Death Valley, and square up against the Clemson Tigers. You won't know anything until then, because right now it's just LSU versus LSU. These guys know their tendencies. These guys have gone up against each other, for the last 2 or 3 years. So they already know what the strengths and weaknesses. So it's easy to kind of exploit that. When you go up against Clemson, the team that you have not played since the 2019 or /2020 national championship game in New Orleans. That was the last time LSU played Clemson. Of course, we all know how that turned out. LSU beat Clemson to win the national championship. And that 2019 will forever forever be considered to be one of, if not the best college football teams of all time. But I'm not, so like when I say the defensive line looked good, I'm not lying to you. They look great. There's a lot of people that would bat for me when I say that the defensive line looked great. Well, how will they look against Clemson? Same thing with the offensive line. Will the offensive line allow 10 sacks against Clemson? I have no idea. But it's kind of hard to tell right now in April because I'm just going off of what I see at the moment. But things could change dramatically in the next 5-6 months, right? So that Clemson game will show you how good this LSU team really is. And especially with the edge rushers. I mean, there's a reason why. I mean, Brian Kelly made a concerted effort to bring in Jack Piper from Florida. They're bringing in Jamari Butler from Nebraska. They're bringing in Patrick Payne from Florida State. All those guys are veterans. All those guys have played at least 4 years of college football. Jamari Butler is a super senior. He's played 6, while Jack Pyburn and Patrick Payne have played 4 years of college football. And they've been awesome throughout the spring. And the fans, if you got the fans in the attendance at the Tiger Stadium, got to see that. And then also on top of that, you have Gabe Relaford coming off of Gabe Relaford coming back. He had a strong freshman campaign. You also have Kalaj Cobbins coming off of he didn't really play much last year, but he's a guy that really had a great spring and fall camp when he came to LSU last year, and he's continued that into this fall in the spring. And he's a guy that will probably get a lot of playing time come fall as a rotational player. And of course, we already know about the interior defensive line: Monroe, Dominic McKinley. Those guys were the stars late in the season as true freshmen. Of course, you brought in Sadir Mitchell, who's 6'6", all of 6'6", 355 pounds. And Sean Washington, he was also a veteran. I mean, the defensive line this year not only is better, but it has a lot more depth. But we'll see when they go up against Clemson. But another thing I want to talk about. Actually, let me pull this up because Brian Kelly, I want to pull Brian Kelly's what he had to say for you guys to kind of know what I'm talking about. Let me share this with you guys. There we go. Give me 1 second. Ooh. Share screen. There we go. So this is Brian Kelly talking about the defense ends.
You've got mature players that have played a lot of football, and certainly that shows up. And it didn't just show up today for me; it showed up every day in practice. And I will say this: I mean, we were very, I would say, intentional about who we were looking for and the kind of personality. Those guys are great workers. They do it the right way off the field, in this building. They are leaders, even in the sense of how they handle themselves amongst our football team, even though they've only been here since January. So these were really impactful players, not only from an edge standpoint in terms of what you see, but I can tell you from behind the scenes, they're very impactful as well.
Brian, we also didn't see Destin Hill. If you can give an update there.
So yeah, of course, they're talking about the injury report. Destin Hill did not participate. He had a high ankle sprain. So nothing serious, but high ankle sprain. He's going to be out for the next 4 to 6 weeks. But nothing like a torn ACL or any of those things that he's gonna be held out throughout next season. But then also as I also mentioned, Caden Durham also had a ankle sprain as well. But his was a little bit more mild, and it's nothing even too serious there. But anyway, also want to talk about from the spring game is the D line rotations, not the D line, the O line rotations. So in most of it, it was Tyree Adams at left tackle, Paul Mubenga at left guard, DJ Chester at center, right guard Cole Eccles, and at right tackle you had Weston Davis on the second team, Terrence Kearney was at left tackle, Ori Williams the left guard, Braylon Moore was at center, Bo Borderline was at right guard, and Josh Thompson was at right tackle. So that's how it looked for the first and second team. However, when they were doing the goal line stuff, they were backed up. They did this thing where they were backed up on like their own three. Oh, I think it was their own three. Actually, maybe the 1 yard line, but they're deep in their own territory, right? Nonetheless, and so the guys who they had out there, Tyree Adams, left tackle, of course, Josh Thompson, the left guard, Braylon Moore at center, Cohen Eccles at right guard, and Weston Davis at right tackle. So that's something that to watch out for. And also they had DJ Chester also rotated at right guard as well with Cohen Eccles. So you could see. It's hard for me to believe that Josh Thompson and Braylon Moore are not in the starting offensive line, right? I really, those guys were brought in the start. Now the guys who I mentioned that were part of the first team end up being them out because they've just been balling out of practice. That's one thing, but I'll be highly shocked if one of those guys or even both those guys aren't a part of the starting offensive line come this September when they have to travel to play Clemson in what should be a top 10 matchup. And I think College Game Day is going to be there, right? They love going to Clemson, especially when it's a top 10 matchup. So it's going to be a crazy atmosphere in Clemson, South Carolina. And of course, you want to have a guy like Josh Thompson, who's played 30 plus games as a right tackle at Northwestern in the Big Ten, which is arguably the first or second best conference, depending on how you view the conference. And no, the Big Ten has the two best conferences in college football. And there's no way you can debate. There's no way you can say the ACC is better than either the Big Ten or the SEC. Those are the two best conferences. And then also a guy like Braylon Moore, who was a starting setup for Virginia Tech, also started over 30 games, and also is very familiar with the Death Valley, the other Death Valley in Clemson, and also has a lot of experience. It's hard for me to see those guys sit on the bench when those two guys have more experience than the guys already mentioned in the first team. But anyway, there was another thing that I thought was very interesting, and really, this is what I'm really excited about in terms of the offense is, Joe Sloan was cooking, straight up cooking. He was cooking the gumbo, the crawfish etouffee. I don't even know what's going. I think he was boiling some crawfish as well with some potatoes and corn. He was cooking. He was cooking. So kind of going over what they did in the red zone and goal line portion of the scrimmage. The first play, 3 tight end set. They do a quarterback draw with Garrett Nussmeier, takes the ball and runs in the end zone. And of course, the LSU crowd went wild, sarcastically, because Gary Nussmeier was known as a guy who liked to scramble when he probably needed to scramble at that moment. But I'm glad that Garrett's a lot more comfortable scrambling and trying to extend the play. I think we've all wanted to see him do that. And there's a lot of times last season where he was trying to do too much with his arm instead of trying to maybe get an extra 3 yards to keep the drive going. And so instead of taking the sack or throwing an interception, famously against A&M, he tried to extend the play. And instead of just running to get the 3-4 yards that he needed to get the first down, he decided to throw it deep. He threw the interception, and that changed the whole entire game. And Texas A&M came back and won that game. But on the second play, Caleb Jackson, your prototypical dive play, he scored it there. But the third play was pretty interesting. It was a misdirected pass play where Gary Nussmeier rolled out. Caleb Jackson kind of sat in the middle of the field. Nussmeier threw it back to him. Caleb Jackson went into the end zone. And this is the fourth play. I like this play. Fourth play. They flexed Nuss to receiver. Juwan Johnson was the quarterback. I think it was Caleb Jackson was the running back, if I remember correctly. And it was a wildcat play. And Juwan Johnson, read option, and he ran into the end zone. So I felt like the creativity there. The fifth play, it was an incomplete pass. But the sixth play, I really like this. 4 tight ends set, all 4 of them. So when they do the 3 tight end set, as I mentioned in the first play, it was Trey Green, Bauer Sharp. Those 2 guys are your first team tight ends whenever you do 12 personnel stuff. And then also in the 3 tight end set, you had Donovan Green. And the 4 tight end set, you had all 3 of those guys plus Borderline, who is installed as more of a blocking tight end. And in a 4 tight end set, Nussmeier threw a shovel pass to Bauer Sharp, wide open for the touchdown. And it was some really cool plays. And I like what Joe Slum was cooking there. And of course, you also have to mention Alex Atkins being there as well, who was also has more experience as a play caller than, let's just say, than Cortez Hankton, right? Cortez Hankton also he is the ops coordinator by title, although he's never called plays in his coaching career. So having a guy like Alex Atkins in there as well to kind of help out with the game plan and play calling, I think is extremely beneficial to LSU's offense, especially when they try to get more physical, especially up front in the run game.